Hi guys, I hope you all are having a good day. So thank you for the emails and the messages about the case study. I honestly got the impression that it helped you a lot, and that was the objective. I know that many of I'm getting a lot of inquiries with respect to self-study students, and based on that feedback, I decided to do this. I call this the video on 7 critical tips for SCS writing. I hope this helps. Meanwhile, do subscribe if you are interested in more content, and make sure that you send me any thoughts, share your comments, and let me know what kind of help you need so that I can design my future work to cater to your specific requirements. This is CIMA strategic case study with Azman Branudeen. That is me. So here, as you can see, today's discussion is going to be a brief one, but a very important one about SCS writing, strategic case study writing. And why I call this writing is because it's very important that in the case study, you communicate your ideas properly. Even if you know your theory really well, even if you are really well ahead with your revision, even if you finished your OTQs very recently and you have all of that knowledge crammed in your mind, you will struggle in passing the paper. You will possibly fail the paper if you can't really communicate whatever thoughts that are coming into your mind when you're doing the paper. If you can't communicate them effectively, you're in trouble. Let's get on with this. Tip number one is know your role, right? Know who you are, know what you are. You are the senior financial manager, SFM, senior financial manager, reporting directly to the CFO, but also working very closely with the entire suite of CXOs, that is the CEO, CIO, CTO, whoever can send you a mail, and working on special projects. So know who you are, get into that role. With that comes this notion that you're a very busy person, which is why you're getting mails and you have to try and respond to them because you've got a lot of work to do, which means you have to feel that pressure to say, look, every task I get is 60 minutes. And I am a busy person because I don't have more than 60 minutes to address this task. The moment the 60-minute cutover is over, it's done. We will, or the system will automatically move on to the next task. So you have to have that impression that you're a busy person and know that you're taken very seriously, which means your answer, the tone of your answer, the way you present things that you write, you can't write the things that you used to write for your operational level case study. You can't put down sentences that you used to present information with basic explanations, basic descriptions. You can't afford to write them anymore, right? You are taken seriously, you are approached for serious matters, and therefore you must act like it, right? That's my first tip with respect to SCS writing. Tip number two, know your core activity. Know your core activity. What do I mean by that? What I mean is CIMA has defined 5 core activities, and in fact that is one of the biggest changes with respect to the 2019 syllabus update. Knowing these core activities is essential as a strategic case study student because you're marked based on these core activities. Your marking guidance, the level descriptors, everything is based on these 5 core activities. You must remember, if you were familiar with the previous model, CIMA used to have these 4 core competencies. They used to call them competencies, saying technical, business acumen, um, and leadership, and people, right? People skills, leadership skills, technical skills, and business acumen skills. That's not it anymore. CIMA doesn't use that method of marking anymore, even though those skills are still tested. So it is important that for each subtask that you get, and the subtasks within each subtask, within each task, you might get about 6 to 8, even sometimes 9 subtasks altogether. And each of these subtasks will cater to a particular core activity, which is why knowing the core activity will help you retain focus. You will stay on track. You will not deviate. You will not write things that are irrelevant. But that is why knowing the core activity is important. And I tell you what these core activities are. Let's take a quick look. The summary is this, right? There are five main ones. A, developing business strategy. B, evaluating business ecosystem and business environment. C, recommend financing strategies. D, evaluate and mitigate risk. E, recommend and maintain a sound control environment. So think about this, right? Take a moment and think. The first activity is about developing strategy. After the entire CIMA career you've had, if you can't develop sound business strategy, what's the point? That's what CIMA is testing here. They directly give you the opportunity to evaluate strategic options, recommend strategies, to look at or evaluate acquisitions, divestments, mergers, exits, etc. Even recommend opportunity and threat responses, as you can see there. So that is part A. Requirement B or co-activity B, which couple of your subtasks will refer to, is about environment. Knowing your surrounding, knowing your environment. Now, even if you go for, let's say, for example, you're a footballer. If you go to play a match, you will assess the environment. You will assess how things are. You will look at the climate. You will look at the grass. Say, for example, in Sri Lanka, cricket is very popular. And when cricketers, when they want to start a match, when they go for the toss, right, initially to decide whether batting will be done first or bowling will be done first, they assess this environment, they assess the ground, they assess the pitch, they even assess humidity. So that is what we do here. Having strategies is not enough if you don't have a good handle of what your environment is, which is why it's very important that you are able to evaluate business ecosystems and environments. How do you do this? There are a number of tools. Macro environment, PESTEL, country, national competitive advantage, etc. Porter's diamond, Porter's five forces, industry analysis tool, self-appraisal, right? Internal position audit, you can use SWOT, right? Stakeholder analysis, you can use Mendelow's matrix. There are different tools throughout your enterprise subjects that you've learned that you can employ in this situation. So using these strategic tools to assess the environment, stakeholder analysis, management response, responding to changes in the environment. Say, for example, this COVID-19 pandemic. How did business react? Not that the case study this time is going to address or simulate an environment of a pandemic, but this is an example of where the entire ecosystem changed. And this can be virtual ecosystems, this can be digital ecosystems that you have as far as your company is concerned. So you have to be thorough with those. How do you, or are you able to recommend KPIs for strategic management? And how do you deal with most of these macroeconomic factors like economic risk, political risk, and currency risk? That's what CIMA tests there. So you should be able to handle this co-activity excellently, because it's the chance is that you will at least get two tasks, two subtasks from this. C is financing. Recommending finance strategy. This is more straightforward, right? Even though it deals with a whole lot of technical jargon, the idea is, are you able to evaluate suitable sources of finance? So you have debt and equity. Are you able to evaluate, or are you able to choose the best one for you at any given point of time? Then can you recommend a good dividend policy? There are different dividend policies in place. What are you currently having? Yeah. Sorry about that. Are you able to recommend good dividend policy? Oh, do we have a ratchet pattern at the moment? Do we have a stable policy of dividends? What will happen if we change our dividend policy? Dividend signaling effect. These things are addressed in this. And the last one is recommending and applying business valuation models. Now here, of course, it will mainly relate to acquisitions or mergers or even MBOs, where the value of the business is required to be assessed, which means you have to have a good handle. You have to have a thorough idea about the different types, different methods of valuation you have at your disposal. And you should be able to pick the right one at the right time. Or you might be looking at a potential merger, potential acquisition, and you might have to come up with not numerically, but come up with or suggest methods of valuation to your CFO. In these situations, how do you go about doing that? That's what requirement or co-activity C is. And it's most likely that one subtask out of the 6 to 8, one subtask, maximum two, if you have a variant of a task with maybe 4 subtasks, maximum 2 subtasks will address this. D and E are also interconnected. D focuses on evaluating and mitigating risk, where you talk about responding to risk, managing the risk register, so evaluating any gaps in the risk register, anything that you want to update in the register, all of that falls under this co-activity. Identifying ethics, ethical dilemmas. In the previous syllabus, it used to be people skills, under people skills. Now it's under co-activity D. So dealing with that, evaluating and mitigating cyber risks, and recommending internal controls. These are the key areas when it comes to evaluating and mitigating risk. So even recommending internal controls falls here. The last co-activity is recommend and maintain a sound control environment. How do you apply your internal audit resources? Now in the pre-scene, there's a document, there's an extract called the internal audit charter. Go through this again. If you've forgotten it, go through it again. That's the way internal audit works, the sequence of how they operate. And you can use internal audit as a resource team to do many functions. The execution of the function is most likely followed through that process in the internal audit charter. So you have to remember that. That is very important. And evaluating and implications of compliance failures. But if you don't comply, the repercussions, how do you deal with that, and how do you mitigate future potentials of non-compliance? And finally, responding to threats of poor governance. As you know, GLAN's corporate governance code is there, and they probably shadow very closely the UK corporate governance that you learned. So make sure that you brush up on your corporate governance areas, which is addressed under co-activity E. So 5 co-activities, let me repeat: A, strategy; B, environment; C, finance; D, risk; and E, control. These are the 5 areas that you will be marked on. Tip number 3 is know the purpose. Now in management reporting, there's this theory called whether if you're preparing a report, if you're writing something, a document, you have to know 4 things. You have to be sure of this: purpose, audience, content, and layout. We even teach it in ACCA's advanced performance management. Let me repeat that: purpose, audience, content, and layout. Now the purpose is very important. What do I mean by the purpose? It's the requirement, right? The requirement of your task. You must absolutely understand the requirement fully, completely, and well. You have to understand it. If you misunderstand this, your answer will completely go haywire. Your answer will be a complete a misunderstood answer, right? It will be something that doesn't really cater to the requirement. You absolutely cannot waste time writing a single unnecessary word. Here, the most precious resource you're dealing with is time. 60 minutes. 60 minutes is not a large amount of time for a task, right? Sometimes in workplaces, you might be taking more than 1 hour to write emails, right? Even if your immediate supervisor or if your boss sends you something that is quite serious, you might take 1 hour, 2 hours, and then you might even take a break, come back, review it, change it, edit it. And you don't have that flexibility here at SCS. CFO sends you a mail, you have 1 hour and you have to part. It's a simulated business environment, and it's also a situation where you have to cater to the requirement, and with the pressure of having spent so many pounds, and you need to pass. So you cannot waste time, which is why I'm telling you, read the requirement. Please read the requirement and read it again just to be sure. And if you don't get it, read it again and again and again. That's the only way. I actually instruct my students, if they ever face a situation of difficulties in understanding the requirement, read it 10 times. Read it 10 times, and I've never heard any complaints. In case there is a task, subtask that is phrased, that is worded in a tricky way, read it again and again, break that sentence apart, see how it combines with each other. We'll look at an example and make read it again until it makes perfect sense. Then you will write a proper answer, right? Even if you take an extra minute to understand the requirement, it would be much better. It would be a better risk, and it would involve major upside risk for you in passing the paper rather than misunderstanding the requirement and writing a completely wrong answer. So let's not do that. Tip number 4, know your audience. Know your audience. Now, purpose, audience. Who is your audience? You're writing most likely to the CFO and the CEO. What about these people is important? They're even busier than you. They don't really have time to waste. Every minute of theirs is precious. Think about the big CEOs. Think about Zuckerberg. Think about Elon Musk. Think about Bill Gates. Think about Buffett. Right? Do you think these people waste their time? Do you think these people like others wasting their time? Even I don't like it when somebody comes and wastes my time. So you absolutely cannot take that chance. They don't have time to waste, which is why you as the presenter must value their time, which means, what does it mean? It means you must stay on point. Always, always make sure that you stay on point. Okay? How to do that? I think I'll help you out. Further, depending on the feedback I'll get, I can give you more tips. The fifth tip, tip number 5, and which also helps you stay on point, is know your points, know your content, purpose, audience, content. So the third one, content, that's what I mean here. Know what you're going to write before you write them. It is important. How do you achieve that? It is important to plan your answer content. That's how you know what you're going to write before you write them. One of the biggest issues I see with students is they're really brilliant, right? And they pass the OTQs, 1 go, 2 go. But the challenge they face in the case study is writing. And you see students by the third para, fourth para of the answer, you see that the sentence structure and the idea that they want to communicate is getting mixed with so many other uh, thoughts that they have in their mind. And they tend to write things that are not very relevant to the specific question that is thrown at them. This happens when you don't have a plan. The problem with not planning is, there's a saying, no, failing to plan is planning to fail. I say this not as much as my teachers used to tell it to me. So the problem is you end up writing too much about what you know and less about what you don't. And all the while, you might have deviated from the requirement. And that is not a risk we can take. Definitely not in this paper. How many pounds have you paid for this? Yeah, I'm sure it's a decent amount of money, and you cannot waste it, which means you have to make sure that whatever words you write specifically caters to the requirement. And how do you ensure that? By planning. At the very least, make a mental note. When you're reading the requirement, make a mental note of the points you want to elaborate on, right? Say it's a question about sources of finance, right? Trigger your mind. 2 sources of finance. There's debt, there's equity. What about debt? You can write about loans. You can write about bonds. Can we issue bonds, right? Everything comes into place. Equity. You can write about share issues. You can write about private placings. You can write about rights issues, right? Make a mental note in your mind, right? And while you're thinking, you filter out the jargon of, or filter out the content to say this is relevant or this is not. But you're doing that while you're focused on the requirement. That's what's important. Stay on point from step 4. And how do you do that? By planning. That is why tip number 5 is know your points, know your content. Address the requirements one by one, always staying on track. So this me stressing on the importance of staying on point. Tip number 6, the one before the final one. Tip number 6 is finish the sentence. Now, I got a few emails. Okay. with respect to the previous video, and some of the emails themselves had sentences that were not complete. Right? You've written something, and the entire clarity of the sentence. Now, I've had a lot of experience reading emails and writing emails, so for me, of course, it's easy to gauge the idea that you're trying to communicate. But even in answers that I see a lot of tendency for students. I don't know if it's under exam pressure. I don't know if it's because, and these are students with good language skills. Huh? I don't know why it is so, but proper sentence structure is missing. And when that happens, maybe because sometimes students try to write lengthy answers and you've got various connectors, parentheses being used, and students lose track of where they started the sentence and where they ended it from. So sometimes I see paragraphs with 120 words. The entire paragraph is one sentence connected with 3 commas and 1 semicolon. That is something that you need to avoid. How do you achieve this? Right? This is what I meant. I see a lot of sentences unfinished, incomplete, in fact, half with great potential but lost potential. This leads to a lack in clarity, and SCS expects clarity. That is, your CFO expects clarity. Always finish your sentences. Right? At the very least, know that a sentence has a subject, an object, and a verb. So you need to make sure that your sentence structure is very clear, and they need not be very complicated. You don't really have to have this very complicated vocabulary to throw around. You've spent with CIMA your OTQs, your E3, P3, F3. That's enough vocabulary to write about business. You don't need any more words. So you need to make sure that your sentences are clear, they have a proper structure, and that your paragraphs are concise. This all relates to all my previous points, huh? Because you are staying on the requirement, you're staying on track, you're not deviating from the requirement at any given time, and the things that you write, the content that you write, is made up of sentences that make sense. Right? And keep your paragraphs concise, maximum within a paragraph 5 to 6 sentences. Don't overdo it. I would say 4 or 5 sentences, depending on how you structure the subheadings and the plan of your answer. Let me tell you the secret to do this. I learned it from my business language writing masters that I work with. Simple, short sentences is the secret. That is the key. Writing simple, short sentences. Okay, if you feel like it's an area, you're writing about ethics and you're really good about ethics, right? Integrity, objectivity, professional competence. You have a whole lot of things in your mind that you want to write. You keep on writing it. Overconfidence leads you to writing long sentences. And sometimes under exam pressure, you don't really have the time to come back to the beginning of the sentence and see whether you really wrote and whether the connection is clear. And the problem is when the sentence connectivity is missing, the clarity of the paragraph itself is lost. And we don't want that. We can't afford to have that. So what is the secret? You write, if you have a lengthy idea, you write it in 3 sentences, 3 simple short sentences. This is key, and you need to practice it. At least practice it through a past variant, at least practice it through your mock exams, whatever you do with any of your tutors that you work, you need to practice this, or else it won't come. Okay. And final tip in writing for the strategic case study of CIMA is know the weightage. And by weightage, I mean time. The time allocation is important. Each task and subtask has a clear weightage assigned. Correct? You agree? Use that weightage to plan for the timing in your mind. You have to use that weightage to plan for the timing. Let's take a look. Through an example, by the end of this segment. The final tip is know your verbs. Now, CIMA has clearly specified the verbs, and it is extremely important you understand the verbs and the respective skill levels. What are these verbs? These are the verbs. Your strategic case study doesn't associate itself with level 1, level 2, or level 3 verbs. All the verbs that you see are level 5 and level 4. In fact, if you really closely look at the past variants, you will see that they use a whole lot of level 5 verbs only. You don't even, you barely see level 4 unless it's words like discuss. Is that clear? So unless you see a verb like discuss, most of the verbs that you see are advise, assess, evaluate, recommend, review, and select. So when they say review, okay, when they say review, if you don't review, if you describe, you're going to lose marks. When they say evaluate, if you recommend, if you suggest, you're going to lose marks. You have to have a good handle, good understanding of your verbs. This is critical. It's critical, it's essential in writing the right kind of answer for your case study. This is not only relevant to the strategic case study, it's also relevant to the MCS, OCS, etc. At those different, at those respective levels. So let's consider one of these verbs, recommend. When you say recommend, it's about proposing a course of action. You have to have recommended something. You would have reviewed it, you would have talked about it, you would have talked about the pros and the cons of it, but you can't exit that task without making a recommendation. It's an absolute necessity because the verb specified in the task is recommend. What's the point if you don't recommend? Evaluate. Evaluate is essentially here appraising or assessing the value of. So how do you appraise something? You look at the good and the bad side of things. You look at the benefits and the risks. You look at the advantages and the disadvantages. You look at the pros and the cons. That's how you appraise, correct? And gauging whether the benefits outweigh the risks. That is what you need to do. In fact, I can share with you the detailed definitions of each of these verbs. I hope it helps. You can drop a comment below to see whether, and then let me know or drop me an email. I can share with you the definitions. But overall, remember, your entire strategic case study revolves around your skills of evaluation and analysis. Can you assess problems and use your judgment to draw conclusions? Can you analyze, examine, and study interrelationships of separate areas in order to identify causes and find evidence to support inferences? Can you do these two? And these are the verbs that are most frequently used. Understanding them is critical. So these are the 7 tips I wanted to share with you with respect to critical skills of writing for the SCS. But I wanted to go one step further. Let's take a look at a small example. Quickly, 2 learnings I want to share. The first learning is this weightage that I told you that we will take a look at. This is the second screen that you're going to see when the exam starts. And I know that most of you, there's a simulation in the CIMA platform as well. If you're a registered student, you can log into your CIMA, mycima.com, mycimastudy.com, the platform, and there's a simulation. You can try it. You would have seen this even if you have accessed past variants. As you can see here, each task has a weightage. Now here, first task has 50-50. 2 subtasks each have equal weightage, which means out of a 60-minute paper, let's say you took 10 minutes to read. Now, how much time do you have remaining? 50 minutes. Out of that 50-minute time frame, you have exactly 25 minutes for subtask A, 25 minutes for subtask B. That's how you associate time for this. Now, second task is important. There's an important lesson here. That is, imagine you cannot afford to go overboard in writing your answer for subtask A. One of the things I see in answers I get is, there are 2 tasks. The first subtask is 40%, like this in the second question here, 40%. Second subtask is 60%. But the student writes the first subtask and goes overboard and spends too much time on that. Whereas the examiner is honestly expecting you to give more effort and give more focus to the second subtask. So please make sure that you don't miss this. It's very important that this is resource allocation. You have a resource, time. How do you allocate it effectively? That's the game here. That's the concern here. That's what you need to do. So do you effectively and smartly allocate the very finite resource you're dealing with here, time? The weightage is critical. That is why the examiner stresses it. Each section has a number of subtasks and an indication of how much of the time available for the section that you should allocate to planning and writing your answer is shown again each subtask in the text of the question. So here task 1 is of equal importance, both subtasks. Task 2, more effort for subtask 2. And the final or the second learning that I want to share with you here, this variant that you see is from ShinePod. Okay, ShinePod variant 2, requirement 2. Okay, now read this question. First subtask is, how should we manage the relationships between ShinePod, the coffee machine manufacturers, and the retailers? So you're talking about the value chain. You are talking about your suppliers. You're talking about yourself, and you're talking about the retailers, your B2B customers. The connection, right? How does so relationship management? You're talking about people. Yeah, you're talking about now. Try to think the co-activity this connects to. This easily would connect to co-activity B. Yeah, because you're talking about your environment, and these are all stakeholders in your environment. Correct? Your supplier, your retailer, your customer, yourself. These are stakeholders. So evaluating the relationship. How do you manage the relationship is what the first subtask asks you. There's a beautiful reference material provided as well. And that subtask is a more relatively easier one. But do you see the second part? How many sentences are there? There are 3 sentences in it. If you misunderstand this, you're going to end up losing at the very least 12 to 15 marks. Okay. And can you afford to do that? So here I want to focus a little bit on the second subtask. The second subtask can be challenging to understand. So what do you have to do? You have to read and read it again. Let's read it. We have always been reluctant to acknowledge the risk in our risk report that manufacturers would stop making machines. We were concerned that such a disclosure might give the manufacturers an advantage in any negotiations. Sentence number 2. Was that concern an adequate justification for our decision to exclude the risk from the risk report? Was that concern an adequate justification? Now, when you read this, you get lost, correct? We were always reluctant to acknowledge the risk in the report. That what risk? There's a manufacturers would stop making machines. We were concerned that such a disclosure might give the manufacturers an advantage. And the question is not even straightforward. There's no verb used. Was that concern an adequate justification? Now, when you read this, first question, you have to try and understand it from the last question, right? So when you read it again, read that last requirement again. Was that concern an adequate justification for our decision to exclude the risk from the risk report? When you read that, comes a question, what concern? Was that concern? What concern? The concern that the disclosure will allow the manufacturer more bargaining power. The concern that the disclosure, us disclosing that risk in the report, will give the manufacturer, give our supplier more bargaining power. That's the concern. Now you know what the concern is. And you read, okay, this concern, was it adequate? Was it enough justification? Oh, now somebody is giving you excuses, right? And what you do is you gauge whether the excuse is enough or not, whether that justifies it. Now, say for example, your friend got late to come. Now, if the friend's excuse is like, sorry man, I got late because I was out with my girlfriend and lost track of time, and I just overslept with her or whatever, that will probably piss you off, because that's not an adequate justification for you. You might raise a concern there. Yeah. But if your friend's concern is, no man, I met with an accident, I was in the car, and the car, and then this suddenly in front of me something happened, or aliens jumped or something like that, then we have a problem. That is an adequate justification. So here, this concern that the disclosure will give the manufacturer more bargaining power, we are trying to assess whether it is sufficient, whether that excuse is good enough or not for us having to include this in the register. So the justification is about that decision to exclude this from the register. So here, how do you think? How do you frame your thinking in this? First question I would ask is, why would we exclude this from the register? Now, why I want to give you this is to help you frame the answer, right? Now, with all this, you need to write it. So the things that you can include in your answer is from questioning. The first question you can ask yourself is, why would we honestly exclude this from the register? Maybe the directors didn't deem it important. That's probably why, no, why you don't include a risk. Maybe when you do the risk assessment, it is of low impact and it is of low likelihood. If that is the case, then the directors might have decided, okay, this is not a major concern. Or directors probably have taken measures to mitigate this and prioritized it as of less importance. Right? They have taken measures. That could also be one reason why they didn't include it, or that the directors completely missed it, which is very unlikely. Now, in Runnabout's case, which is highly unlikely, because in Runnabout's case, we only have one supplier, Winery. We're very reliant on them. So it's very difficult to miss a uh, problem like this. So if now we missed it, no, we haven't included it. The next thought that you have to address is, how can it look? How does it look? Now, investors might feel that the board is unaware, and that might lead to them thinking that we are incompetent even, right? And that is not something, that is not a good image for the board of directors. Market will always try to assume from the available information, and the market will anyway deem that we are relying on this manufacturer, right? It's very likely that the market has access to information because we are not the only company they are dealing with. Supplier will most likely assume a stronger position if news gets out that we are afraid, right? If this news gets out, especially through investors, because they don't, or analysts, because they are always like hawks looking at the company. If the news gets out that we are afraid that the supplier might get more bargaining power, so we didn't include it in the risk register, the supplier might actually use it to their advantage, because this puts us in a weaker position as far as the reputation and the news and the image and the brand is concerned. Therefore, it's likely that this is not an adequate justification. This particular issue, this particular excuse, no, it doesn't seem like that's adequate. Better if it were acknowledged and steps for mitigation were taken, and if it was included as well. Especially why I included this was because if this gets addressed in Runnabout's case, that is what we should have done. We should probably do, because of our very big reliance on mirroring robotics to supply hoverboards for us. So be vigilant, be careful. But you know, the lesson I want to finally impart here is, whenever you feel like you're blank of what you want to really include in the answer, ask yourself simple questions relating to the requirement, like what I've done here. Why would we exclude this from the register? How can it look? What does it lead to? Therefore, what can we do? Right? Ask yourself simple questions, and that will probably pave the way for you to trigger some important thoughts. So, on that note, these are my key 7 tips. Make sure that you use them, you put them to good use. You can comment your thoughts, your queries, your questions, down there. I'm not very new to this, but you can comment, you can ask any questions. My details are there. You can connect with me. You can log in through Facebook. There's Instagram, there's YouTube, there's email as well. And of course, do subscribe for more content. And I would willingly take any suggestions you have to create more content for you that will probably help you. Yeah. All the best with your exams, guys. I know it's about 6-7 days more. Make sure that you do a good job. Don't panic. Stay relaxed, stay chill, and I'm sure you'll be fine. All the very best. Have fun, take care, and stay safe. Wash your hands, stay safe, stay home. Make sure that you are a big part of beating the coronavirus pandemic. God bless, guys.